KaraokeBooks.
The Adventures of Ferdinand, Count Fathom. Tobias Smollett. Audiobook. Chapter 41. One quarrel is compromised, and another decided by unusual arms. Among other topics of conversation that were discussed at this genial meeting, Sir Mungo's scheme was brought upon the carpet by His Majesty, who was graciously pleased to ask how his subscription filled. To this interrogation the knight answered, that he met with great opposition from a spirit of levity and self-conceit, which seemed to prevail in this generation, but that no difficulties should discourage him from persevering in his duty, and he trusted in God, that, in a very little time, he should be able to confute and overthrow the false philosophy of the moderns, and to restore the writings of Moses to that pre-eminence and veneration which is due to an inspired author. He spoke of the immortal Newton with infinite contempt, and undertook to extract from the Pentateuch a system of chronology which would ascertain the progress of time since the fourth day of the creation to the present hour, with such exactness, that not one vibration of a pendulum should be lost. Nay, he affirmed that the perfection of all arts and sciences might be attained by studying these secret memoirs, and that he himself did not despair of learning from them the art of transmuting baser metals into gold. The Chevalier, though he did not pretend to contradict these assertions, was too much attached to his own religion to acquiesce in the knight's project of converting the Jews and the Gentiles to the Protestant heresy, which, he said, God Almighty would never suffer to triumph over the interests of his own holy Catholic Church. This objection produced abundance of altercation between two very unequal disputants, and the Frenchman, finding himself puzzled by the learning of his antagonist, had recourse to the argumentum ad hominem, by laying his hand upon his sword, and declaring that he was ready to lose the last drop of his blood in opposition to such a damnable scheme. Sir Mungo, though in all appearance reduced to the last stage of animal existence, no sooner heard this epithet applied to his plan, than his eyes gleamed like lightning. He sprung from his seat with the agility of a grasshopper, and, darting himself out at the door like an arrow from a bow, reappeared in a moment with a long rusty weapon, which might have been shown among a collection of rarities as the sword of Guy Earl of Warwick. This implement he brandished over the Chevalier's head with the dexterity of an old prize fighter, exclaiming, in the French language, "Thou art a profane wretch marked out for the vengeance of heaven, whose unworthy minister I am, and here thou shalt fall by the sword of the Lord and of Gideon." The Chevalier, unterrified by this dreadful salutation, desired he would accompany him to a more convenient place, and the world might have been deprived of one or both these knights errant, had not General Macleaver, at the desire of His Majesty, interposed, and found means to bring matters to an accommodation. In the afternoon the society was visited by the Major's cousin and her daughters, who no sooner appeared than they were recognized by our adventurer, and his acquaintance with them renewed in such a manner as alarmed the delicacy of Captain Minikin, who in the evening repaired to the Count's apartment, and with a formal physiognomy, accosted him in these words: "Sir, I beg pardon for this intrusion, but I come to consult you about an affair in which my honor is concerned. And a soldier without honor, you know, is no better than a body without a soul. I have always admired that speech of Hotspur in the first part of Henry IV. By heaven, methinks it were an easy leap to pluck bright honor from the pale fact moon, or dive into the bottom of the deep, where fathom line could never touch the ground, and pluck up drowned honor by the locks. There is a boldness and ease in the expression, and the images are very picturesque. But without any further preamble, pray, sir, give me leave to ask how long you have been acquainted with those ladies who drank tea with us this afternoon. You'll forgive the question, sir, when I tell you that Major Macleaver introduced Mrs. Minikin to them as to ladies of character, and, I don't know how, sir, I have a sort of presentiment that my wife has been imposed upon. Perhaps I may be mistaken, and God grant I may. but there was a je ne sais quoi in their behavior today, which begins to alarm my suspicion. Sir, I have nothing but my reputation to depend upon, and I hope you will excuse me, when I earnestly begged to know what rank they maintain in life. Fathom, without minding the consequence, told him, with a simper, that he knew them to be very good-natured ladies, who devoted themselves to the happiness of mankind. This explanation had no sooner escaped from his lips, than the captain's face began to glow with indignation. His eyes seemed bursting from their spheres. He swelled to twice his natural dimensions, and, raising himself on his tiptoes, pronounced, in a strain that emulated thunder, blood. Sir, you seem to make very light of the matter, but it is no joke to me, I'll assure you, and McCleaver shall see that I am not to be affronted with impunity. Sir, I shall take it as a singular favor if you will be the bearer of a billet to him, which I shall write in 3 words. Nay, sir, you must give me leave to insist upon it, as you are the only gentleman of our mess whom I can entrust with an affair of this nature. Fathom, rather than run the risk of disobliging such a punctilious warrior, after having in vain attempted to dissuade him from his purpose, undertook to carry the challenge, which was immediately penned in these words. Sir, you have violated my honor in imposing upon Mrs. Minnikin your pretended cousins as ladies of virtue and reputation. I therefore demand such satisfaction as a soldier ought to receive, and expect you will adjust with my friend Count Fathom the terms upon which you shall be met by the much injured. Goliahminikin. This Marceau being sealed and directed, was forthwith carried by our adventurer to the lodgings of the Major, who had by this time retired to rest, but hearing the Count's voice, he got up and opened the door in cuerpo, to the astonishment of Ferdinand, who had never before seen such an Herculean figure. He made an apology for receiving the Count in his birthday suit, to which he said he was reduced by the heat of his constitution, though he might have assigned a more adequate cause, by owning that his shirt was in the hands of his washerwoman. Then shrouding himself in a blanket, desired to know what had procured him the honor of such an extraordinary visit. He read the letter with great composure, like a man accustomed to such intercourse. Then addressing himself to the bearer, I will be after diverting the gentleman, said he, in any manner he shall think proper, but, by Jesus, this is no place for such amusements, because, as you well know, my dear Count, if both should be killed by the chance of war, neither of us will be able to escape, and after the breath is out of his body, he will make but a sorry excuse to his family and friends. But that is no concern of mine, and therefore I am ready to please him in his own way. Fathom approved of his remarks, which he reinforced with sundry considerations, to the same purpose, and begged the assistance of the Major's advice, in finding some expedient to terminate the affair without bloodshed, that no troublesome consequences might ensue either to him or to his antagonist, who, in spite of this overstraining formality, seemed to be a person of worth and good nature. With all my heart, said the generous Hibernian, I have a great regard for the little man, and my own character is not to seek at this time of day. I have served a long apprenticeship to fighting, as this same carcass can testify, and if he compels me to run him through the body, by my shoal, I shall do it in a friendly manner. So saying, he threw aside the blanket, and displayed scars and seams innumerable upon his body, which appeared like an old patched leathern doublet. I remember, proceeded this champion, when I was a slave at Algiers, Murphy McMorris and I happened to have some difference in the bagnio, upon which he bade me turn out. Ara, for what? Said I. Here are no weapons that a gentleman can use, and you would not be such a negro as to box like an English carman. After he had puzzled himself for some time, he proposed that we should retire into a corner, and funk one another with brimstone, till one of us should give out. Accordingly we crammed half a dozen tobacco pipes with sulphur, and, setting foot to foot, began to smoke, and kept a constant fire, until McMorris dropped down. Then I threw away my pipe, and taking poor Murphy in my arms, "What, are you dead?" said I. "If you are dead, speak." "No, by Jesus," cried he, "I ain't dead, but I'm speechless." So he owned I had obtained the victory, and we were as good friends as ever. Now, if Mr. Minikin thinks proper to put the affair upon the same issue, I will smoke a pipe of brimstone with him tomorrow morning, and if I cry out first, I will be after asking pardon for this supposed affront. Fathom could not help laughing at the proposal, to which, however, he objected on account of Minikin's delicate constitution, which might suffer more detriment from breathing in an atmosphere of sulfur than from the discharge of a pistol, or the thrust of a small sword. He therefore suggested another expedient in lieu of the sulfur, namely, the gum called asafetida, which, though abundantly nauseous, could have no effect upon the infirm texture of the lieutenant's lungs. This hint being relished by the major, our adventurer returned to his principal, and having repeated the other's arguments against the use of mortal instruments, described the succedaneum which he had concerted with McLeaver. The captain at first believed the scheme was calculated for subjecting him to the ridicule of his fellow prisoners, and began to storm with great violence. But, by the assurances and address of Fathom, he was at length reconciled to the plan, and preparations were made on each side for this duel, which was actually smoked next day, about noon, in a small closet, detached from the challenger's apartment, and within hearing of his Majesty, and all his court, assembled as witnesses and umpires of the contest. The combatants, being locked up together, began to ply their engines with great fury, and it was not long before Captain Minikin perceived he had a manifest advantage over his antagonist. For his organs were familiarized to the effluvia of this drug, which he had frequently used in the course of an hypochondriac disorder. Whereas McLeaver, who was a stranger to all sorts of medicine, by his wry faces and attempts to puke, expressed the utmost abhorrence of the smell that invaded his nostrils. Nevertheless, resolved to hold out to the last extremity, he continued in action until the closet was filled with such an intolerable vapor as discomposed the whole economy of his entrails, and compelled him to disgorge his breakfast in the face of his opponent, whose nerves were so disconcerted by this disagreeable and unforeseen discharge, that he fell back into his chair in a swoon, and the major bellowed aloud for assistance. The door being opened, he ran directly to the window, to inhale the fresh air, while the captain, recovering from his fit, complained of McLeaver's unfair proceeding, and demanded justice of the arbitrators, who decided in his favor, and the major being prevailed upon to ask pardon for having introduced Mrs. Minikin to women of rotten reputation, the parties were reconciled to each other, and peace and concord re-established in the mess. Fathom acquired universal applause for his discreet and humane conduct upon this occasion, and that same afternoon had an opportunity of seeing the lady in whose cause he had exerted himself. He was presented to her as the husband's particular friend, and when she understood how much she was indebted to his care and concern for the captain's safety, she treated him with uncommon marks of distinction, and he found her a genteel, well-bred woman, not without a good deal of personal charms, and a well-cultivated understanding.
If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the channel.